Another wonderful job of song leading and beautiful voices blended together to praise God. Brethren, our God is a magnificent God. There is absolutely nothing in this world that even begins to become anything like that God. And I would ask you always to remember that the Lord God of heaven not only made us, but every breath you take, every breath that you take, every beat of your heart, God gives it to you. It is God who sustains all things, His Son, by the word of His power. We do indeed serve a marvelous and wonderful God. It is God, of course, who actually made the land of Israel, as all the lands of the world. He's the one also that gave us a book that talks about them. Let me say before I go any further, thank you to the Van Allens and the Kemps that have fed us wondrously today. I hope I make it through the service tonight without falling asleep. If I happen to, you hear snoring from the pulpit, somebody say something. Excellent meals that we have enjoyed, my wife and myself. I want to look at something with you because I believe from time to time we may get an idea of a land that might not be exactly like we think it is. If you mentioned Israel to children, a grand picture comes within their mind. And oftentimes we continue with the pictures from our youth as they go on up into our adulthood. When I went to Nazareth, I had always seen when I was a little child a little picture of a village out in a little plains area, and I would see children running and playing on it, very, very small. And then I went to Nazareth. Why, Jesus grew up there in a mountain town. I didn't realize. I grew up in the mountains of Tennessee, some of the high hills that are up there. I didn't know that Jesus did. It was never in any of the stuff I colored as a child, None of that was there. And then suddenly here's a mountain town. I should have known it. Luke 4 says they were going to throw him off of a hill there. I should have had some kind of understanding that this was but I didn't. It has two hills that are actually there. Palestinians are on the lower hills, and the Jewish people are on the higher hill that's within the Nazareth region. By the way, there's a fine congregation of our Lord's people that still worships there. Maurice Jadon is the minister, and they just had installed elders, I guess, in the last couple of years. And pray for them. It's a Palestinian congregation. One time it had Jewish individuals that were a part of it, but the Jewish individuals have died out, and it's strictly Palestinian now. Pray for them. Wonderful group of God's people. I've often thought that in all the land of Israel that there should be a church at Nazareth. Isn't that an interesting thought? A church of our Lord there at Nazareth. But our views and concepts and ideas of the land of Israel, sometimes they may be strange. Sometimes they may be different than what we may have thought. And I'd like to look at some of that with you tonight, if I might. I'd like to look at Israel in the world with you. Let me see if it's going to come up. Do you see that little spot there? Actually, the spot is bigger than Israel. Well, how big might that be? Well, let's put Israel in the United States. Is that fair enough? No, that's a guesstimate. I mean, it's possible that I got a little bit where it shouldn't be. But let's look at Florida just for a second, all right? You see Florida with respect to the United States? And I'd like to look at this picture of Florida now. We'll kind of blow it up a little bit. But let's look at Israel now. You see how big it is. It's a pretty nice sized place, right? Until you put it inside Florida. Yeah, I heard that. What? Oh, by the way, let's see. Yes, I still have this. It's not even populated from here down. So actually what you're looking at, the true population of the state, if you will, up here at Tel Dan, is it come down right around Orlando. What do you think about that? You sometimes say Jesus went walking all over and think of it in terms of him walking over the United States. Oh, no. It'd be like him going over an area about the size that you see there. In the last part, as I showed you here, right here in this area, this is the Negev area, the southern area, if you will. And let me tell you, you just can't hardly live there. I mean, there are people who are out there and living nomadic things. Sometimes you'll find a cave or two along the way where someone is still living, or perhaps someone especially, I guess you might say, as you're coming down through here, you might find a service station or two and a house out there housing the people who are running it. Folks, this is not a huge place, okay? And in a minute we're going to see that it's situated in such a way that it's a small place, but it sits right in the middle of monstrous kingdoms, monstrous empires. And it's expected to live there for God. Israel could fit into Florida as far as land size is concerned 8 times. It's 263 miles long, north to south, width between 9 and 71 miles east to west. What do you think? Look at that thing again there, 263 miles long. Now, we're talking about all the way down, going to Port Charlotte, if you will, from the northern portion of Jacksonville. We're not talking about actual inhabited land area. Y'all understand the difference? About half that as far as distance. As a matter of fact, I drove about that distance to come down and be able to be with you, marvelous brethren. That's wild, isn't it? That's just crazy to think things in that way. Megiddo. Megiddo has a very special place in this small land area. A very special place in this small land area. As a matter of fact, here's a place that's going to see more wars than all the other cities of Israel combined. Yeah. That might sound weird to you, strange again. It's as we're going to see in just a moment, though, its situation creates this problem for the place called Megiddo. It's called the gatekeeper of the way of the sea. You'll see what that means in just a minute. If you'll look up, you'll see Megiddo, and I'll try to get a little bit of a, is it going to go for me? Yeah, there it goes. You see the little square there, and then the arrow pointing right to where Megiddo is. But I want to show you something here that just to give you an idea of the place in biblical ideas and concepts. If you'll look right here at Megiddo, and then you'll notice a little jut out right here. Now today, Haifa is right there at that jut out, but that is Mount Carmel. Remember Elijah there on Mount Carmel? And I want you to notice the mountain itself, there's a whole range of mountains through here. Mount Carmel in this mountain range, it just goes right straight into the sea. It reminded me of a lot of when we were in Northern Ireland. We were looking out from a point where my wife's people had come over from Scotland, and when they got to Ireland, they got to the place where they could look across the Irish Sea and see the Scottish hills come down into the ocean. And that's what you're looking at there. These hills are coming straight down into the ocean. It's a marvelous sight. You can go there by train, if you will. Some of their substations that are not subways really, but they are transportation that takes up train transportation. Again, we'll get a little closer in here, and this is Carmel again. That's the Mount Carmel mountain range. Here's Megiddo, and here's a place we call Jezreel. Technically, this whole area in here, we'll look at in a moment, is a valley area with the Kishon River that runs through the middle here. And everything you see kind of more of a darkish color of brown, that's all mountains. That's all mountains. And that's going to present some problems. It's also going to be the reason why Megiddo is located where Megiddo is located. We're going to try it. It's called the Way of the Sea, the Via Maris. There was a road that came up out of Egypt, okay? It comes up out of Egypt, and it goes up through Israel. And this road, there are two of these in actuality. They come up out of Egypt. They come up this way. At the southern end of this, then what we would say is this is about the southern extent of the Judean Empire, if you will. We want to call it that. It's kingdom. You go on up a little ways, you got Megiddo in the middle, and at the top you have Hazor. You've got these three places that are of extreme importance to Israel. These three places are of incredible importance to the nation of Israel. The road is coming out of Egypt. It doesn't end in Israel. It goes on north out of that, up into Assyria, and then on over into Babylon. There's only one other way that you can go, but it's going to be more difficult, if you will, for the armies to either come down or go up. These are some of the ancient trade routes. Can you see them there all right? If you come up out of Egypt, here's that road that takes the way of the sea. It goes up through Tyre and Sidon, but right here in the middle, I guess is the best place that I can put. You'll see a crossover, and it goes on over into Babylon. And some of it goes on up this way across it. Thank you very much. Now I'm blind. Okay, well, go ahead. I'm kidding. Please keep it there. And so this is one route that is there. But there's another route that comes across here during this place we called the Negev before, and it comes up this way. And as you'll see in a moment, it is the King's Highway. But the one that comes up the way of the sea through Megiddo comes through Belath, Gezer, and then it keeps going up. Here's that mountain range here, and right here is the Via Maris Road. And that road had to have something there for security purposes for someone trying to travel it, okay? And so there's a city built on a mound here, right up next to the mountain, if you will. And then it would cut across, if you came across, you would cut across to the Jordan through a valley that didn't have any mountains. And that gave you free reign to travel. You could get your chariots in there. You could take whatever you wished. It was a very interesting area, if you will, all of this valley area coming down to the Jordan, and then up here's the Sea of Galilee. Over here to the side, however, is another way that goes up, and it's called the King's Highway. And that's one, by the way, that the children of Israel actually traveled on. That's kind of the route that they took when they came up out of Egyptian captivity. They come up on a place headed up the King's Highway. You go through Moabite territory, Edomite territory, Ammonite territory, making it up this way. But these were well-established nations, and they had strong fortifications. And so the King's Highway was a trade way, and if you wished to, that was fine. The Edomites, however, could get a hold of it several places along the road, and they were pirates of the areas. I guess one good way to put it. You had to pay a pretty hefty sum if you were going to have their protection going through. And so you begin to see these two lines of travel, if you will, the King's Highway here and the way of the sea here, and this for Egypt is much faster than making this way here. So Egypt, if they want to go up to do anything in the northern countries, look where they're going to have to go through. Folks, what you're looking at here is this little strip of land, okay? This little strip of land here. This is Israel. And if you're going to go anywhere from Egypt up in any kind of military battle, you're going to have to carry your folks through here, and you're going to have to carry them. The quickest way is up through the Via Maris, the way of the sea. And to come through, you've also got to pass through a place here at Megiddo. And then you're going to have to ask yourself a question. Are you in alliance with Israel trying to go up? If you're in Egypt and you're in an alliance, will they let you go through without any worries? Of course, if you're Egypt, you're thinking, who cares? And if you're Assyria in the north going to come down, are you in alliance at that time? As Jehu did at one point have an alliance with Assyria. What do you do? Megiddo is at the heart of all trade and at the heart of all passage through Palestine. That one city is at the heart of all the travel. Now I want you to look at another area. Here's Mount Carmel here again. Here's Megiddo. This area in here, all this coming down through here is called the Jezreel Valley, also known as the Valley of Esdraelon. This valley has been more soaked with human blood than you can imagine. It has just run blood red through the years as people have fought here at this valley. Chariots, you see, were able to run through here where they had a hard time coming across mountain peaks. Esdraelon, which is the plain or valley of Jezreel, that's the Greek form for the Hebrew word Jezreel. And so if you see Jezreel, then you see Valley of Esdraelon, same thing. Speaking of the same thing. But I want to look again with you at this picture. If you're going to come up this plain, there's a little pass that comes through here at Megiddo. Now I need to tell you something else, though. They wanted a little, at least, an option, right? So they had another small place just up the way where you could kind of come through. But here's the way you want to go. Go straight down through the valley, come straight up this way, and head on up if you're Egyptians marching toward Syria, if you're fighting them. Or if you're fighting with them against Babylon later, that's the way you're going to go. And where is it, did it say, the good old King Josiah met the king of Egypt? Right here. Right here. And that's where he dies. The Jezreel Valley, I can do this best I can here, right down in this area here. You can stand at Megiddo as you come down. You can stand at Megiddo and look out over incredible. I'll give you a view of that valley as we go a little further. Throughout the periods of human occupation in the area, the Jezreel Valley, it served as an incredibly important transportation route. I cannot tell you, this is the spot. This is the way that you're going to go. It connects the northern coastal plain to the Jordan Valley. It bisects all of the hills that dominate the topography of that region. In addition to connecting a number of subregions, the valley also formed a crucial segment of the ancient highway, connecting the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia, that is the Turkish region, that ran along the eastern Mediterranean coast. But it was forced inland. It was forced inland. This trail was forced inland via the Jezreel Valley due to Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel just dissects the land. You've got to find a way through. In very general terms, it may be possible to refer to the extended Jezreel Valley as the system of valleys connecting Haifa Bay on the Mediterranean coast to the eastern extension of the Jordan Valley beyond the Jordan River. This valley includes from east to west Zebulun, Jezreel, Harod, and Bethshan valleys. And Bethshan actually is at the place where one of the great cities of the Decapolis were, and it's a beautiful sight to behold, and perhaps someday. By the way, I had to choose five different towns from about 25 or 26, and I just chose these because it felt like they give you a better picture of the land and how it functioned. This valley that we're talking about now, this Jezreel Valley, is in the area here. You can see how it would come through, and as it came through, brethren, it would also cut through this place. You recognize Mount Gilboa? Anybody know anything about Mount Gilboa? You'll see some more later. It's where Saul died. Why is he there? Because that's where they can fight out on open country. That's where he can come against them. Again, it's been the cradle of archaeology as well. In this particular country, biblical archaeology, if you wish, it's providing us with a window into the history of this country. It's one of the largest city mounds that's left today in Israel. It covers about 15 acres, and it's rich in archaeological finds, and I do mean rich in archaeological finds. Tel Megiddo is an important site for the study of the material culture of biblical times. It's the only site in the land of the Bible with the remains, listen carefully, of 30 cities built one on top of the other. 30 cities. And obviously all of these are not Israelite cities, are they? This city dates back. Megiddo's history covers several millennia, from pre-pottery Neolithic to the Persian period in the mid-first millennium BC. Long, long time that this city was built. It was the scene of many battles that decided the fate of nations and of empires, even up to our own present time. Battles of Megiddo that went on in the valley of Jezreel as well. Tutmos III. And by the way, It's thought by many, and I am one who subscribed to that view, that Tutmosis III was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. But during the time before that happened, a Canaanite coalition came together under the leadership of the king of Kadesh in 1482. This was during the time of Moses and Israelite captivity, just before the going out of 1446 BC. Again, Deborah and Barak. Y'all remember the story of Sisera. You remember from Mount Tabor where it speaks. I'll show you Mount Tabor a little bit later on. But Deborah and Barak sang a song of praise to God in Judges chapter 5, extolling God for helping Israel defeat the Canaanite army. And Sisera, near Megiddo. The battle area was at Taanach. It says, by the waters of Megiddo. And Scripture says the Canaanites were swept away by the suddenly swollen waters of the Kishon River. Verses 19 through 21. Judges 4:15 says, God did something to discomfit him and his chariots. Flooding would have stopped his chariots, as Deborah and Barak's song point out. Remember, they're on a plain. What do you do if the waters flood your plain with your chariots there? Get a little bit of a picture here. This is again the area where the battle took place. I want to blow it up a little bit. This is the Kishon River, right down in the midst of this. You see how it runs down through this Jezreel Valley. And that's what it looks like when it gets swollen. How would you like to drive your chariots through that? Do your battling in a time like that? God used the river to overflow. Again, Gideon, a later hero of Israel. You remember the story of Gideon and his 300, y'all recall? This is the area where his battle went on. Gideon defeated the Midianites in Judges 7, according to Judges 6 and verse 33, in the valley of Jezreel, also known as the plain of Esdraelon or the plain of Megiddo. The Philistines fought Israel under Saul at Jezreel. Saul was killed on Mount Gilboa, which is by the valley, 1 Samuel 29, verse 1, chapter 31 and verse 8. Did y'all know all that was going on in that one little area? And one little spot that's there. All of those battles are going on. That's not all. Pharaoh Necho leading his army from Egypt to Carchemish. Remember, we studied that earlier in our look at the archaeology and its benefits to man. He went up to battle the Babylonians at Carchemish. He was confronted by Josiah. Remember, this is the place. And Josiah was killed in the ensuing battle. If you look again, you can see a little area here of red that goes all around through here. That would be known as the area of Jezreel. And all those battles and all those deaths and all that blood was shed across it. Someone said it was one of the most well-fertilized valleys of all of Israel, as well it would be. But it was fertilized with the blood of humanity. The armies of ancient Assyria and Egypt engaged in battle on the plain of Esdraelon years before Israel came into being. They engaged on the plain of Esdraelon on many occasions. Why? Look, Israel is that one little corridor. And each side coming down, they're going to meet right in the middle. And that's where the blood's going to flow. That's where the battles go on. In, say, 1187, Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, destroyed a fortress erected on Esdraelon by the Knights Templars. Oh, it's still a place where people fought. But that wasn't the end. Napoleon, with an army of 4,000, defeated a numerically superior Mohammedan army on the plain of Esdraelon. Oh, it even comes up into modern times, doesn't it? He was stopped, however, in his Egyptian campaign around 1799. General Edmund H. Allenby, First World War, had a decisive victory at Megiddo in 1918 and forced the Turks to relinquish control of Palestine to the British. Thereafter, he was often referred to as Allenby of Armageddon. And the reason why they didn't just simply call it Megiddo is because the Hebrew takes two words and creates this name. There's Megiddo, but then if it's called a mound, the Hebrew will add a R to it or a har to it. Har Mageddon. and thus you have mountain of Megiddo. Had a little bit of a run, hasn't it? Had a lot of people who are there. And I can tell you now, it's a marvelous place if you want to fight. It's a better one if you want to grow crops. Megiddo is linked to numerous great figures in world history. Among them, King Solomon of Israel, King Josiah of late monarchic Judah, Pharaohs Tutmos III, Shishak and Necho of Egypt, Kings Tiglath-Pileser III and Esarhaddon of Assyria. Tutmosis said of Megiddo, and this is very early, we're going back some time, he said in the 15th century BC, for the ruler of every northern country is in Megiddo, and its capture, listen to this, its capture is as the capture of 1,000 cities. You take it out of the equation, and anything you want is open to you beyond. And many kings actually came down with their entourages to that city to fight with the city, not against it. Megiddo has been excavated for over a century. Starting on April 1st, 1903, it's become the cradle of the archaeology of Israel, the source of and answer to almost every problem related to Bronze and Iron Ages in the Holy Land. It's the only site in the Levant. The Levant is talking about Israel, Palestine. It's the only site in the Levant mentioned in all great records of the ancient Near East. The Old Testament, New Testaments on one hand, Egyptian records have it, Assyrian records have it, Hittite sources. Many places and nations spoke of this area. Joshua 12 verses 7 and 21. These are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel smote on this side Jordan on the west. And he tells where they are. And then at the very end of it, he says the king of Taanach won, the king of Megiddo won, but they did not take the city, as you'll see in a moment. Joshua 17 verse 11. Manasseh had in Issachar and in Asher Bethshan, remember that's in that Jezreel Valley area, and her towns, and Ibleam and her towns, the inhabitants of Dor, her towns, the inhabitants of Endor, the inhabitants of Taanach, the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, they lived within it, but they did not own it. Neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and her towns, nor Taanach and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. Still in the days of the Judges, and still Canaanites lived there. Still they were the ones that were the gateway to the way of the sea. The kings came and fought. Judges 5 says they fought the kings of Canaan and Taanach by the waters of Megiddo. Again, eventually Megiddo comes under Israelite control. 1 Chronicles 7 and verse 29. By the borders of the children of Manasseh, Bethshan and her towns, Taanach and her towns, Megiddo and her towns, Dor and her towns, in these dwelt the children of Joseph, the son of Israel. They finally take over now by the time of that writing. I don't know how I just did that, but we'll try. Go back to where it was. I'm just going to go 1 Kings 4:12. He speaks of beyond the son of Ahilud, to him pertain to various towns. Megiddo, by this time, is now firmly, it's become a part of the divisions of Solomon's kingdom, and it's firmly in the hands of Israel. And then look at something stated in 1 Kings 9, verse 15. Look at it carefully. This is the reason of the levy which King Solomon raised. Remember, they were talking about how much they were taxed. Y'all recall that? And they wanted to be out, and they used, told Rehoboam, we want to be out from this heavy taxation. Well, I want you to look at this for a moment and see what these heavy taxes were buying. Number one, it says to build the house of the Lord. Number two, to build his own house, speaking of Solomon's, and Milo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor. Now I want you to notice Hazor comes up again. You recall the three towns we spoke of? The one on the northern section that protected Israel from the north, the one at the southern section, Gezer, and one in the middle, which would stop everything in case one of the first two did not hold up, Megiddo. So look at the passage. And the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. You see that? Megiddo becomes one of the fortress cities of Solomon. And so he has to really work on that. And I'll show you something that he did in that city, and it's in both of the other cities as well. Let's see if I can get it going. In that day, Zechariah 12:11, it's mentioned in the prophets, there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon in the valley of Megiddo. Hadad Rimmon is the place where Josiah fell in the battle against Pharaoh Necho, referencing the idea of the great outpouring of sorrow that would come in the day of Messiah. Revelation 16:16, last time in our Bible is the sequence in which we place them, that you find Megiddo. He gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And we're all familiar with that, right? But it's two words, Har-Mageddon. Now it's used as a symbol. It's used as a symbol where there's a great battle, if you will, but it's a spiritual one, my brethren. It has nothing to do with somebody going to line up on the plains of Megiddo in the valley of Jezreel again in some future time. It's talking about a great place where blood has been shed, and there's going to be great battles that take place upon it through the centuries. But now there'll be spiritual ones. The oldest surviving record of its name appears in the Temple of Karnak, where Thutmose III, if you look at depending on which you use high chronology or low chronology of Egypt, he's caused an account of his battle at Megiddo in 1468. And he inscribes this on his walls. And here you see. And in a telling of us what he did when he went to Megiddo and destroyed it. Took it. I'm not reading that for you. These are the roads again that go along the various highways, northern routes, Canaanite infantry. This is extra biblical references, however, to Megiddo, and these are the ones that would be written, if you will. But I want to show you something that happens here. This is the way that you would have gone. You'd have to go right over the mountainside through Megiddo. And generally, you'd have a whole bunch of Canaanite chariots, or Israeli chariots, if you will, waiting for you here. Unless you went around the long route and came up here near Yokneam. Now, that's another way of going, and that's generally where everybody thought everybody would go, because this pass here is so marvelously small. It's an incredibly small pass for you to get through. Who would come through there with an army? But that's exactly what happened with Thutmose. This guy, if he is indeed the Thutmose of the Exodus, you certainly see his attitude displayed here on his wall, telling you about how he was going to take this land. He had a couple of options open to here. Here at Gath Padala, he could have come around to the side, gone up through Tanakh, then made his way on up. He could have gone around to the side here. He could have said, I'll go up that way. Won't worry about having to go through that small pass, but he looked straight in the eyes of his generals. He said, fellas, I'm going straight up to that pass. I'm going straight up through it. I don't care how small it is. I'm taking my army through, and I'm going to wipe out Megiddo and keep on going on my trek. You know why it worked for him? Now, and by the way, his generals backed away and said, I tell you what, we're not making that track. There's no way that that's any good. He said, well, I am. Who will follow me? Well, all the generals followed. And they took it through, and the Megiddo fell. But there were only a few chariots there waiting. They knew he was coming, but there were only a few chariots waiting. They said, there's no way anybody in their right mind would come here. So they had all their forces up here at Yokneam, waiting on him to come. He marched straight through here and took it. That's a mess, but that's how it happened. Fair enough? To give a sense of the size of the community, when Thutmose III of Egypt conquered Megiddo 3,500 years ago, he left with, among other things, 1,929 head of cattle, 2,000 goats, 20,500 sheep, 240 horses, 200 army uniforms, and 502 bows. That's a lot. May not seem like much. That's a lot for that day and that time. 6 of the Amarna tablets also talk about the diplomatic problems that were going on in the 18th dynasty of Egypt. Letters were sent by the king of Megiddo to Pharaoh. Now, I want you to notice this is a little bit after Israel has entered the land, and they're starting to they've already taken the greater portion of it, but they're continuing to take the other cities the longer that they live there. And it's during this time that these Amarna tablets are written. And the king of Megiddo, remember, they're still fighting against Israel during this time. In these letters, that's what the letters look like, by the way. I'm not reading that either. It's in cuneiform, and I don't like that font. I like Times New Roman. Looking again over, though, in these letters, Viridiria consistently reaffirms his loyalty to his Egyptian overlord. He pleaded also for an Egyptian military assistance. He wanted 100 archers in order to repel what he called the Apiru bands. It's a lot like Hebrew, but just the Apiru bands, which were active in his vicinity. I'm going to talk to y'all about that in a minute. You know, we talk about our great long-range weapons of this day and time. This king understood that with 100 Egyptian archers, he could take on anything in the land coming against him. These fellows were deadly. They could stand on those walls and take out anything that even came remotely close. Just give me 100 archers, I can hold the land with ease. That was his request. Further mention of the town appears in the records of the 19th dynasty during the pharaohs Seti I, Ramses II, and Merneptah. Again, talking about Megiddo, what's needed. And that's what it looked like. Megiddo's archaeological site looks like this today. You come up to it. Here's a cross-section of the years on the left. Israel Finkelstein. I don't put a lot of credence with Finkelstein. I'm sorry. He's a wonderful archaeologist, but it seems like he's got a real bone to pick with the Bible. Yagel Yadin is the conventional chronology there on the right. It was an Assyrian city first, came under Jeroboam II, Ahab, and Jeroboam I. Then it came under the united monarchy of Solomon, and then at the very base of it, it was a Canaanite Philistine city. Now you got to read down backwards here, okay? Canaanite Philistine city comes the united monarchy with Solomon, Jeroboam II, Ahab, Jeroboam I, the Assyrian city one on the top. In other words, that's how you had to dig down through it in order to get to each of the sections that were there. And it's according to these periods that it's set in there. Now, we went over those before, and I'm not going to go over them again. All right. In this picture you see before you here, you have your water system here, a gated area here, and we're going to really look at that in just a moment. You have your northern stables here, your early bronze temples here, your grain silo here. You've also got the Welcome Center. That wasn't there then, by the way. They didn't have one of those outside Megiddo. Thank goodness they have one now. I went to the Welcome Center too. They had some good water fountain there. This is standing right outside the Welcome Center. When you walk inside, they've got just kind of a little layout, if you will, of the city. And it also has parts of it where different elevations rise and fall, so you can see where the city was at different times. And a marvelous layout. You can see one of the elevations going up here. I now want to look at the approach. As you actually come in, and this approach would have been made by people of old as well. Here we are making an approach up to the side of that city. And then you go into the gate of it. This is the steps leading up to the gate system. And here are the gates. They're called a double gate system. A double gate system. A double gate system. You had two. You had a gate here, and you had a gate here. And let me tell you, that is a horror to try to navigate if you're trying to bring an army through. Because look at the way the gates are set. One is set straight in. One is set sideways going in. And while you're trying to come in here, you got folks on the wall killing you out here. And when you get in on the inside, you got all of the people out here. And once you get in here, now you've got people from the inside walls that can shoot back the other way. Marvelous system. I mean, it's just a great looking system, as you can see here, this gated system as it goes through. What's the big deal about them? Cities in ancient times were vulnerable to attacks. The entrance to the city was especially a concern. So you have a large gate complexes such as these were built. An attacker would have to make it through these two gates to get inside the city. Archers are stationed on all the towers, as well as holding burning oil, rocks, and a lot of other nasty defenses. Often the first gate faced the opposite direction as Solomon, so that soldiers trying to enter would have their right side, the side that isn't protected by their shield, exposed to the city walls. Attacking a city through the gates was very, very difficult. And this is the reason of the levy. I want to go back to this. That Solomon raised. He wanted to build the house of the Lord, his own house, Milo, wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. All three of these fortress cities were extremely important to Solomon. Hazor in the north, Gezer in the south, and Megiddo right there in the center of the land. It protected the way of the sea from the south, and the Hazor the way of the sea from the northern intrusion by Syria and Assyria. Megiddo was the central fortress city. It's the middle line of defense if either of the first two cities fail. And listen to this carefully. All three of these cities share the same gate system like you see at Megiddo, showing you Solomon's work as he prepared to defend his nation. But they're so small. This is what the city like, the gates look like trying to go in. I'm going to do some very quick pictures. These are the gated areas on either side. I was there. And you can, I'm sorry. Every time I look at myself in that, I have bad thoughts. The second, going on in, as you continue into the gates, you can see how they go back on either side. This is an interior between two of the gated walls. And I'm standing in one, poor guy, with the camera. We'll go back outside now to what's called the Megiddo Trench. Let me point to you where that is. Here's the Megiddo Trench in this area here. I want to look at it with you. I'm standing actually in front of it. You can't quite see down through it, but the first modern excavations took place under the German Society for Oriental Research. Schumacher was the expedition leader. He discovered a palace and tombs from around 1000 to 2000 BC. They dug a large trench straight through it. Today, other archaeologists have gone back to re-sift the diggings at Megiddo to see what may have been missed. You see, the problem with doing that now is that these new things they find won't be quote unquote in situ, and thus difficult for dating. Whenever we did our digs, whenever we would go down, we would have to take an entire area. We'd snap the picture. We would do GPS on the top of it, check the soil, what it looked like, what changes would be made as you went down through it, what pottery is found at each level. That's not the way Schumacher did. Schumacher said, boys, dig a ditch. And whatever shows up, shows up. And he just went right down through the center of it, threw everything out on either side. Now, it's an early time, so I won't go too far. I'm standing in front of that ditch looking straight out onto the plain of Esdraelon. And here's the Megiddo Trench. First temple that's found there, early Bronze period. Second temple, still in the area of Bronze period. A third temple was found in the early Bronze. And then you have a fourth temple. All of these are early Bronze period temples from 3500 to about 2200 BC. This was an offering place. It's called the Bama. It's a big place that lifted up. You can see it a little more clearly here. That's where they would take sacrifices and bring them up. And this was an artist or somebody fixed up something to show what it would probably look like while they were using it. Again, you have a place that's called the corbelled tomb. Now, these tombs actually predate. That style predates Israel's time period. The corbelled tomb here, I'm not going to give a whole lot, but these tombs were found at Megiddo. They predate the Exodus, built during Middle Bronze too, about 2000 to 1500 BC. Again, you have a little place here. It's a grain silo. This one fascinated me. Didn't know right immediately what it was till I read the sign that was right beside it. And then it looks like this. You see how the steps go down? Well, actually, on the other side that I'm standing on, you got steps coming back up. You have a set of steps going down, another set of steps coming up. And the way this works is you pour all the grain in that you want. You just keep going down, you got the grain, and make your way back up. Marvelously and ingeniously set up, beautiful system. I can get one more. Here are the horse stables that were there. Remember, Solomon had his stables there, his war horses, and he had to have them there for the purpose of safety and security. And there's one of the troughs that is there. Here's another section of troughs, section to section, where you would have grain and also mainly water that flowed through the majority of these. Still there today, you can look at them. Notice that on the side of this particular watering trough that they had, and here are two big rocks, and they've got holes punched in it. You got to tie your horse up somewhere, don't you? And this is what they look like, if you will, artist reconstruction of them. They also had a great well there. This is one of those wonderful things that happens in a city. If they have a water supply always available to them, even during the midst of a siege. And that's what made Megiddo, again, a marvelous place for a fortress city. They had their own water supply. This is the water system. If you kind of get an idea of it, you come down into it from the top here. You come down here, walk out. But there's something over here to the side I'll show you in just a moment. I'm at the top, ready to go down there and get a drink. We start down within it there, and then these long, long steps that are going down. We didn't push over 3 or 4 people out of our way making it. Moving on down the steps even further, it's quite a ways down in there. This looks back up from, you're not even at the bottom here, just on one of the staging areas, if you will. Then you keep going down even further into it. I caught the back side of Dr. Cloud's head. I said I'd send it to him. I never did. This, again, can you see the water itself right down in here? Can you see the water? It's very, very light down on the bottom. It's a stream that runs through it there. Here's a little better picture of it, if you will. And here's one of our guides, our guide at that time on me. He's standing there. I don't know what he's doing, but he's standing on a particular set of steps, and there are special steps. Let me show you something here. Look at this spot right over here to the side. You see to the left of it? Right in here where it just came up? Folks, that's another entrance to the well. But it would have to be carefully hidden. Would it not? Or what could you do? There it is coming up out of the ground onto the other side outside. It would be very greatly secured during time of battle. Here's some of the artifacts found there. Yes, they too played Nintendo. I mean, gaming boards. They too had gaming boards that they played. You can look and see some of the ways that are there. I've not played it yet. Here's some Megiddo ivory. Megiddo was known for ivory. You read in the scriptures about how expensive that ivory was. And some of the best examples of internationalism in art of the Fertile Crescent are the decorative ivories from Megiddo. Here you see a griffin on display from the 13th century BC, showing a reclining composite figure with a lion's body and a bird's head and wings. Here you have some ornamental furniture. It's a little hard for me. I normally like a cushion on mine. Here you have something, though, and I'd like you to look at it carefully. Someone asked about the question, the word El in Scripture. The word El is a word that just means God. It was applied, the Canaanites of Israel worshipped many gods. The chief of the pantheon of the father of the gods was El. Someone says, well, what about Baal? That was a Tyrian god. That was from Tyre and Sidon that came through. But El is the one that sits in the pantheon, if you will. He's the father of all Israelite gods. And he's portrayed in this statue in gold-covered bronze. Now, the Hebrews also called their god El, because that was a way of speaking of deity. It was not speaking of him. And yet, as the years went on, they began to worship El as El. This El. And that's a sadness. That's a horror that they did so. When you go through your Bible in your King James Version, and you'll be going along, how many of you see the word Lord in all caps? Anytime you see that in all caps, you are seeing actually what's called the name of God, the Holy Tetragram, the Holy 4 letters, Yod He Vav He, WH, and you'll sometimes see it written as Jehovah. Others will say Yahweh in it. The problem for us today, knowing what that name actually sounded like, was it was a name that wasn't supposed to be spoken. In Israelite writings today, all you'll see across it is just Shem, meaning the name. And so sometimes they'll just have a blank spot, just a kind of a dash. You don't say the name. And so they didn't want you saying it. So remember that Hebrew only has consonants, and the consonants were Yod He Vav He. And you'd have to somehow place some vowels on the inside. And so they stuck vowels on the inside. Watch this carefully. They stuck vowels on the inside that you couldn't pronounce the letters with. These figurines were idols whose worship was forbidden by the early Israelite prophets. The statue was excavated at Megiddo, 35 to 36 AD. Here is an ivory sacramental object of winged sphinxes. Folks, these are not individuals who were not artistic, who did not have artistic concepts and thoughts. Here you have the plaque of a robed woman ivory with glass eyes. By the way, those eyes are still in there today. And they're really, I don't know, kind of weird to look at if you get up close with them. I've not gotten too close. And then you also have an ivory head. Notice the little spots for the eyes are empty there. Sometimes they would be filled, sometimes they would be left empty. Here's an ivory comb. You say, where's the comb? Look down the very bottom over here to the left with me. Do you see this area? All the rest of the teeth are gone. You couldn't comb much at a time today with that. But during that time, all of this would be there, an ivory comb. Very beautiful and very, very expensive. And here you have something called the clay liver model. This is found at Stratum 7, 13th to early 12th century, something that the Canaanites did as a part of trying to predict the future. You see a picture of this. This is from Ezekiel chapter 21, 21 to 22. A whole bunch of these livers, and when you looked at them, copies were made of clay livers showing the different ways that the clay livers are put together. If you cut it open and the liver looks like this, cut the animal open and it looks like this, then it means this or it means that. And that's from the Bible too, not because the Bible is saying it was right, but it's saying the king of Babylon stood at the parting of the way, at the head of the two ways to use divination. He's trying to figure out whether he's going to go on down to Egypt or if the king of Babylon is going to go against Jerusalem. He's got to make a choice on that. And so he made his arrows bright. He consulted with his images. He looked in the liver. Now you had these schools set up with all these different liver types, clay things that had been across the years. They had all these schools set up to teach you when you look in the liver, here's what it looks like. And that's the reason why you see these liver models. You had a school there that taught you how to read livers. I like to eat them sometime, but that days are long past. Well, let me just point out something that he says before. At his right hand, talking about Babylon, was the divination for Jerusalem. In other words, when he looked at this, it looked at the liver in his right hand. The choice he makes is for Jerusalem. That's why he goes to Jerusalem to destroy it. He looked at the liver. Megiddo artifacts, you got a Hittite seal over on the left, on the Zut. The words meaning on a Zut, charioteer, well-being. Then you've got also a Megiddo seal with a roaring lion with a curved tail during the reign of Jeroboam II in the 18th century BC. Look at this. The Shema of Jeroboam, written right on the seal. How about that? The king still has his evidences there within Megiddo. One of the things that drew archaeologist David Usishkin and Israel Finkelstein back to Megiddo in 1994 was a broken cuneiform tablet that had surfaced at the end of the University of Chicago's expedition in 1939. Rather than being discovered by the excavators, however, it was recovered from a dump of excavated soil by a local shepherd from Kibbutz Megiddo after the Chicago team had finished digging. In other words, there's still stuff there, still down there, and they said, let's go sift. And that's what they found, one of the things that they found. So they said, we got to go back and re-sift it all again, though it won't be in situ. The tablet was inscribed on both sides with a total of 37 lines of cuneiform. This particular tablet is most interesting because it includes a portion of something called the Epic of Gilgamesh. That was a Mesopotamian legend that talked about the flood. And there it's found here at Megiddo. They date it to about 1550 to 1200 BC. And it may suggest the presence of an ancient scribal school at Megiddo. See if I can keep it going here. I'm trying. Did I go too far? By the way, they're going to wet sift this area now. All right, we're on top of Megiddo, and you remember I told you the plain of Esdraelon. Now you're looking at it. Here's the Jezreel Valley as you look out across it. Folks, that's a lot of place to fight, isn't it? It's also a lot of place to grow food, and they are now really growing food. And you've got the nice Kashin River that helps with the watering of that place as well. This is the view of Megiddo, northeast across the Jezreel Valley to Mount Tabor. Look in the very background here. You see this little balded mound? They call it Well, let's see, what did they call it? It said it was a grapefruit cut in half, and you look over there, if you find a grapefruit cut in half in the mountains, you found Tabor. Here's some other views of that valley, looking way, way out. You can see it'd be a great place for being able to engage, and that's the people I know them. Seeing Megiddo helps us realize some things, and I want you to catch this with me as we close out tonight. It helps you realize the role that Israel played among the great nations of the Near East. They're just a little squatty nation right in between. Do you understand? They didn't look at Israel like you and I read through the Bible today. In their day and time, it's that little squatty nation that's in the way. If we want to go down to fight Egypt, we got to go through that little tiny squatty nation. If we're going to come up from Egypt and we've got to go through that little tiny squatty nation. That's how they thought of it. But that little tiny squatty nation had a God that at one point in time in history at least defeated all of them through that little tiny group. However, these great empires of Assyria and Babylon, they had to come through Israel to attack it. Egyptians had to come through it. Alliances were being formed all the time to deal with these superpowers trying to get at one another. And that's why you will see all through the Bible in the Old Testament that Israel aligned with Egypt. Israel allied with Assyria. Israel allied with Babylon. You'll read about the alliances that are there because they're concerned about who can help them if somebody keeps trying to come down through their valley, through their little area there. So they ally at all times. Sometimes Israel with Egypt, sometimes with Assyria like Jehu did, other times with Babylon. But in all of these times, God cried one message to Israel. Ally yourselves with none of these. I am your God. You're there alone in the midst of all this. I know it. But I am your God. I can take care of you. I don't care how big they are, how numerous they are. It doesn't matter. I am your God. Do not form these alliances. All they serve to do is to bring Assyrian practices into you, Babylonian practices in unto you, Egyptian practices in unto you. Don't make these alliances. He kept telling them over, I will be your protector. Time and again, Israel felt their role as the buffer between the empires and doubted that God would be with them. What about ourselves as a church? Israel could look, as so many do today at the church, and one of the things they say is, the Church of Jesus Christ or the Church of Christ here in America is just a Johnny-come-lately along the way. No, we're not. We date back to the first century. Pentecost, AD 33. We're not Johnny-come-lately. And yet everybody keeps looking around and saying, well, that church back to Reformation time. That church back to 60. That church back to here. That church. And here you guys are around in this. No, we go back to AD 33. Because the Word of God is the seed of the kingdom. When the seed was given to us in the first century, it brings forth the church in every generation of men. And it's the same one in every generation as the first generation. However, we look around at the huge religions of the world, sometimes even here at home, and we say, well, perhaps we should unite with others. Let's maybe forsake the Bible way. We're small. Like Israel with Megiddo. And all these are around us, and they just push us around. They're so large, they're so many. They encompass us on every side. In our national media, they fill the nation's airways. Their buildings dwarf our own. Their leadership attack us as small and insignificant. All of these things were said of Israel. But God was with Israel. Megiddo speaks loudly to us today. True Christianity stands at the crossroads of all religions. And it needs to recognize its allegiance to God alone. Don't make alliances. Small Israel always stood whenever she looked to God in faith. Small ancient Israel overcame Egypt when she marched with God and went out of bondage into freedom. Ancient Israel defeated Assyria at Jerusalem when God fought for her, as He always will. Ancient Israel came out of Babylonian bondage and was allowed to go home to Palestine under Cyrus the Persian, and Babylon fell. So also shall the true Israel of God stand today. You do realize in Galatians 6 and verse 16, it calls us the Israel of God. You do know that. There are a lot of people who speak out against this topic they have called supersessionism. They say, oh, you really think you take Israel's place? No, I don't think so. I know so. We are the Israel of God today. The Bible's very clear with that. Doesn't mean that we have not come out of the ancient prophecies with respect to Israel, but God has a spiritual Israel today called the church. We are that true Israel, the church of Jesus Christ. Let these religions rise. Let them fall everywhere about us, if you will. They're not creations of eternity. They're man-made institutions of time. Our strength is not in our size. It's not in our numbers. Our strength is in our God, and it always will be. Our King reigns till time is no more. No weapon ever formed can defeat us. The weapons of our warfare, they're not carnal. They're mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and everything high that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and it brings into captivity every thought to the obedience of Jesus Christ. Why do we fret? Oh, 21st century house of God. Why do we fret? Let Zion stand firm. We did not create ourselves. We are the work of His hands, having built us on the rock of the confession that He is the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is our shout of confession. This is our hope of resurrection. This is our shield. It is our sword. It's the ground of every prayer that we offer and of every song of praise that we sing. Let worldly religion exalt itself. Let it attract all these masses of men into its buildings with its games and its gimmicks. But we shall still have our hope and our strength and our means of survival living in His promises that of this kingdom there shall be no end. Theirs will end. We shall never end. Small among the religions, you don't see the totality of this kingdom that encompasses the entirety of all the redeemed, of all the ages, not only here upon this earth, but in the heavens above. We don't invite people to the Little Brown Church in the Wildwood. We don't invite people to a crystal cathedral. We invite all men to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, to the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. We invite men to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven. We invite men home to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect. We invite men home to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of the sprinkling that He made at Calvary. I'm going to try to get it out of here. You turn it off, please. Thank you. Don't look at the numbers on your boards. I'm not saying that elders don't need to keep tabs of that, and we don't need to know if something's happening among it. I'm just telling you, don't look at those numbers as being your power, your strength. Don't look at the denominational world that sits around you and many other religions that are about you. Don't look at them. I know they look massive to you. They look massive to Israel in its day and time with the religions and nations of old. Please listen. Look upward. Look upward. Look onward. Look forward. Nothing can stop us. If we'll only look to our God and not trust to our own thoughts and ideas and man-made inventions that all fail with time. The Bible goes on forever. His word is forever, and it will take you to forever with Him. If you're not a child of God, don't listen to the ridiculous speech about you. Listen to the gospel. Listen to Jesus tell you to believe on Him with all your heart and soul. Repent of your sins. Confess Him as the wonderful Master that He is, Lord of lords and King of kings. Come with Him tonight. What better opportunity if you've not done so yet? Come with Him tonight. Delve into the blood of Calvary with Him. Go down into His death, His burial, and His resurrection. Rise with Him. And then don't look around you to see what can scare you. Look upward to see what can uphold you. And live the days of your lives in the service of this King. Consider while we stand and while we sing.